everyone. My name is Kat Savage, and I'm a professional artist, clinical hypnotherapist, and wellbeing expert working with those in the creative arts sector. In my line of work, I get to meet some amazing, colourful people, from actors to artists, people who live their lives by their own rules, fueled by passion and determination to bring their unique talents into the world. I wanted to discover what it took for people to leave the usual 9 to 5 and hop on a dream, to capture their bravest moments and share these meaningful conversations with you, so that together we can explore the ideas, emotions, and moments that could potentially change our lives too. The Brave Moment podcast begins now, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, probably the bravest moment not only for my guests, but for the whole world. So let's keep talking, have some fun, and enjoy the show. This week on the show, we speak to master storyteller Brian Fitzgerald from the creative agency Dancing Fox. After working for GreenPeace for 35 years, Brian and fellow comrade Tommy Crawford began assembling a new band of, in their own words, beautiful mischief makers to bring fresh creative energy to the tables of some of the biggest charities and foundations in the world, helping them to reform their message and promote the well-being of our planet. We speak openly and honestly about his time in the activist field and discover some of the bravest moments that Brian has been a party to in his colourful and unique life. It is with great pleasure that I get to introduce you to a mischievous dancing fox, Brian Fitzgerald. Brian, welcome to the show.
It's so good to be here, Kat. Lovely to see you and hear you and be here with you.
I think I met you in the best possible way. We were taken on board by Animals Asia. At the time, they were trying to redefine their message. And I was flown out to Vietnam with the best people in the world. And I met Iris, first of all, before I met you, I think. I met Iris, the lovely Iris, who's another member of the Dancing Fox team, and found out that she was a muse that basically drew all over the walls and all of this kind of stuff. And the first day that we worked with you, I can remember thinking, oh my God, I found my people. These are my spirit animal people, because you just came in with all of this energy. You asked us all basically to reveal something unusual about ourselves. You got out crazy shaking eggs, and this woman started drawing all over the walls. I was so impressed. I was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. I'm so glad that I made this decision to come out here. So before we begin this epic journey into who you are, why don't you tell the listeners out there, what is Dancing Fox and how did it come to be?
Sure. I mean, Dancing Fox is a creative agency, and we specialize in story. We work only with NGOs, activists, social change artists, people who are working for a more beautiful world. And we're just trying to share this passion for story as a theory of change, and story as something that that shapes our behavior, our beliefs, our sense of what's right and what's wrong and what's possible, and all of those things are the things that activists are working with, and the things that can be, blockading our successes. So anyway, in terms of how we came to be, we sort of sprung out of an experience that my co-founder, Tommy Crawford, and I had at GreenPeace, where I'd been an activist there for 30 years at that point. Tommy sort of rocked up as a candidate for a job with our toxic detox campaign. And it was the kind of interview where I said to the woman who's making the hiring, who happened to also be named Kat, just cancel the rest of the interviews, hire that guy. He's absolutely who we need. And he came out of the advertising world, which was an unusual move for GreenPeace. He wasn't a classic sort of activist, but he brought all of this knowledge of the psychology and the persuasion science of the advertising world, and was just desperate to put it to good use at GreenPeace. And we hit it off immediately. A lot of the things that I'd been playing with at GreenPeace as new sort of ideas for campaigning, he sort of riffed on, and we eventually ended up running a program to redefine the organizational story at GreenPeace, and fell in with Jonah Sachs, wonderful storyteller and theorist of story, and that just set off a project that sent us deep into this forest of story and the idea of story as theory of change. And we loved it so much that by the time we finished this epic 2-year project of articulating the organizational story at GreenPeace, and ended up getting folded into their 10-year strategy. And we looked around and we were like, well, feels like we're done here, but we're not done. And we decided to sort of split from GreenPeace and create this agency and break every norm of the sort of activist world in terms of how we get good ideas and how we create a safe space and a creative space for magical storytelling. And that's kind of what led us to Animals Asia and the experience of meeting you. And I remember when we first met, the first conversation we had was about story and folktale, and you were completely steeped in all of these magical storytelling traditions that we love working with. And so, it was a magical workshop, but it wasn't just because of us. It was because of you and the people that were in that room.
You are so delicious as a person. It's ridiculous. I love everything you've just said, and you say it with such beauty and such open-heartedness. And I think that was one of the reasons why I just fell in love with the work that you and Iris and Tom and the rest of the team do. I think it's unbelievable what you can pull out of people at the drop of a hat, it seems. And yes, harking back to the first time of meeting you in that strange environment with people I hadn't really worked with before. It was such an experience, and it's definitely impacted my life. And I know that we both have this incredible love of books. We're both bookwormy people, and incredibly in love with the idea of story and how it shapes people's lives and how it shaped our own lives. So talking of story and talking of life, I want to take you right back to when you were a little person. And I want you to just describe to me, what was your life like as a child? And were you as addicted to story back then as you are now?
Yeah, I think I was. I mean, I was quite introverted as a child. I think I was somewhat of a misfit for a long time. My family had the experience sort of uprooting from where we were in Connecticut when I was, I guess, 10 years old, and moving into a very small town in upstate New York that had this sort of deep tradition, Seneca Falls, actually, which was the place where the first Women's Rights Convention was held, and all kinds of sort of weird and wonderful sort of revolutionary stuff happened. It was also the place where the Mormon Church was born, out of the dozens of totally weird sort of religious movements in the 1800s. And I don't know, it was a place where when you dropped in as someone who was moving into that space, you were definitely an outsider. And so, a lot of my youth was spent with my nose buried in books, and they were a refuge and a place to escape. And I actually grew up in a very privileged and beautiful location, and I now absolutely adore the geography of the place where I grew up. But I was desperate to get out of it. As a teenager, it was, this is the armpit of the universe and I must see the world. And books were a way that I could do that, from the comfort of my own little reading room.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because I live in a beautiful place. I live down in Cornwall, and I've ended up, despite my wanting to leave, I've ended up living 5 minutes down the road from where I grew up. And had exactly the same thoughts. I was like, no, I must leave. And I did the big smoke, and I went up to London for 10 years of my life, pretty much. And absolutely hated it. It wasn't my pace at all. And I worked out very, very early on that I could do music anywhere. So that was lucky. And so I met my lovely husband, who's listening to the show right now, and moved myself back home because I got homesick. And now with new eyes, I get to appreciate the landscape where I live now. And do you ever go back? Do you ever go back to where you grew up and look at it with a different set of eyes?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that idea of new eyes is exactly right. And literally for me, because I have two sons, and I feel incredibly guilty that I've raised them in an urban environment here in Amsterdam, and they haven't had the joy of having a creek in their backyard or a lake in their backyard as I did, and be able to get out and explore the forest and the wild spaces there. So yeah, I bring them back, and my brother has a lovely place on the lake, and we mess around with boats and go out into the wilderness, and we get a concentrated bullion cube of 2 weeks of wilderness experience or nature experience, and I see it through their eyes, and they adore it. They absolutely love it, and it does my heart good to see it again.
Oh, I love that. I'm so coming with you sometime.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've had friends over there, and it is a magical, magical place. And it's even more magical now. When I was growing up, there were no big birds, raptors. They'd all been pretty much, wiped out by pesticide use. It's a highly agricultural area. And to now be there and see osprey and eagles and herons is just, it's remarkable, because they're completely out of context compared to my youth. They just weren't there. And now they're coming back. And that's, seeing that restoration is fantastic. It's really great.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine. I mean, I felt really lucky recently that I've had a few rarer wagtails come to my garden, but I can't imagine looking up and seeing eagles and osprey, but maybe one day. So taking you back to that space as a child, I know that you mentioned that, you grew up with quite a religious family. Tell me about that and what happened.
Yeah. Well, this was kind of my first taste of rebellion. Was I grew up in a Catholic family, and we went to Latin Mass at Christmas time, and I have to say, there's still things I love about Catholicism in terms of the just the pomp and the ceremony, and there was a magic of listening to Latin being chanted out over in this acoustically beautifully designed space made of marble that I still to this day I love that. But at some point I was hearing these stories about all these people who didn't have water splashed on their forehead are going to purgatory, and I thought, wow, that seems really unfair. There's an awful lot of people who've been alive, throughout the history of the planet who just never had water splashed on their head or ashes put on their forehead or, any of these rituals of the Catholic Church. And I just, at one point, I just sort of squared my shoulders and faced up to my father, who was quite an imposing figure in my life, and said, Dad, I don't want to go to church anymore. I feel like a hypocrite. And I just remember he just growled at me, "You're too young to know what a hypocrite is," and kind of marched off. And I thought, okay, well, that didn't go so well. But then the next Sunday, we didn't go to church. And the Sunday after that, we didn't go to church. And the Sunday after that, we didn't go to church. And not a word was said in the family. But I realized I had probably hit on some doubt or some disagreement that I was completely unaware of, and had turned that into an action. And it wasn't until years later that I looked back on it and thought, that was probably my first action as an activist, of standing up and saying what I believed and watching it actually change something in the world. So yeah, it was a moment for 11, 12-year-old me, or however old I was at the time.
That's unbelievable, actually, because I can remember being 11 or 12 and I just started secondary school, and it was a Christian school, as it is in England. And I can remember sitting there thinking to myself, this doesn't make sense for me. It made sense for a lot of other people, but it didn't make sense for me. And actually, I ended up studying Buddhist philosophy at A-level because it made so little sense to me that I had to study something else to sort of redefine my look at not necessarily religion, but things that are put into boxes. So beliefs that are put into boxes. And I realized through studying religious education, actually, just how many boxes there were, and how many different ways of living your life or believing or having faith or whatever there was as well. And it was quite an eye-opening experience to look at all of these different religions and think, okay, so really the main point of all of them is to be compassionate to our fellow man. And I think every person that has ever tried activism or is interested in activism will have had that point where we're all just kind of trying to work towards the same thing, which is just to have compassion throughout the whole planet for everyone and everything.
No, exactly. And, this is why I absolutely adore Yuval Harari's Sapiens, and that sort of satellite image he has of the progress of empathy and the progress of human kindness as something that has been increasing on a linear scale in measurable ways. And it's hard sometimes to appreciate that when we're sort of stuck in this nose against the window pane view of history, where what we're looking at is all the injustice and the seeming lack of all that right now. But he does have this vision of it continuing forward and extending out to animal rights and a deeper and more compassionate sort of view of human rights. And I think he's onto something, that Yuval Harari. I'd pay attention to him.
I think you're right. Mm-hmm. You were the first person to actually recommend that book to me, and that was when I met you in Vietnam. It's on my bookshelf. I haven't read it yet, but I can't wait to, because everyone I speak to has said, you must read it, you must read it. I was like, I've got it, but it's a doorstop, and I really wanted to pay attention to it.
It's a cat book. It's definitely a Cat Savage book.
So, talking of heroes, who were your biggest heroes as a child?
Oh, that's easy. It was Gandalf and Aragorn and Frodo. But it was also Zorro. I don't know. I was drawn to these wonderful characters from the Lord of the Rings in particular. But if I had to name heroes, they definitely all would have come from literature. They all would have come from what I was reading in the day. Although, actually, I will say there was something about Abby Hoffman and the Jefferson Airplane and the sort of counterculture figures that were springing up in the 60s, and Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, that held a deep attraction to me. And there was, I'm dating myself here, but I was born in 58. So I was sort of watching through 11, 12-year-old eyes this cultural revolution in the United States that was happening. And, I think history gives it really, really short shrift. It got, this was a movement that stopped a war, arguably toppled a president, and was making a case for an entire cultural revolution based on love and peace. And I think that was so profoundly threatening to the status quo at the time that a couple things happened. It got absorbed into the monetization of the safe space of the Pepsi generation, and it got cartooned and characterized and mischaracterized as the sort of lazy, stoned out Haight-Ashbury hippie on a corner, and yet there was tremendous power in that movement, and there was tremendous integrity in the values that an awful lot of people who stood up during that time stood for. Abby Hoffman in particular, I just loved his I remember hearing about his action at the stock exchange, where he just started throwing dollar bills out from the arena overhead, and he just caused this mass riot of everybody grabbing at the dollar bills. And it was just such a beautifully creative action and so spot on. It was a performance. It was art as activism. And I really looked up to that particular example that he sort of gave to the world.
I love that you grew up in an environment where fear was sort of, I mean, obviously it was prevalent as it is today, but that love and actually that peaceful movement was sort of coming in baby steps and blossoming before your eyes. And you got to grow up in that environment. You lucky man. Oh my goodness. Can you remember, at that time, I mean, were you influenced by that? Because obviously you were quite a young person at that time.
Deeply.
Did it change something in you? Did you think, I want to do this when I'm older, or did that come later?
Yeah, no, it was much later. I mean, my politics didn't really form until I went to a very conservative university and realized I didn't fit in. So it was a very negative sort of shaping. It was like, I can't figure out, something's wrong here.
Shocker.
But there was an admiration of the pluck and the creativity and the cultural expressions of the '60s and the music. And I remember hearing Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone on the radio, and I was like, what was that? And trying to tune in my little transistor radio to catch a Chicago station that was playing it so I might hear it again. I was in love with all that, but I can't say that I understood the politics of it at that point, or that I really had defined my own politics until much, much later.
It's lovely to see that time, though, influencing your work now. I mean, you say that activism is art, and that's something that I know that Dancing Fox really stand for and encourage in even the people that believe themselves not to be creative or artistic. And it's beautiful to witness that. I think, from my perspective, I just feel incredibly lucky to be a part of your work. Even on the peripheral, whenever I sort of collide with you guys, it's always so exciting and so colourful. And it smells sweet in my mind, like a good sweet flower does.
Lovely. Nice.
Talking of smells, what smell reminds you of home?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a really good question. We do this exercise that I don't think we've done with you, but in many of our play shops, we will get people into this very, very meditative space where they're drawing a spiral out and get them going back into their memories, their childhood memories often. And exactly to capture this, there's amazing things that happen when you think about smells and odors. But I think if I had to name one off the top of my head, I would say it would be the smell of my dad cooking pancakes. There was something. My dad did not go into the kitchen. He was the 1950s male figure, and you did not cook except if it was at the barbecue. But pancakes were the exception, and he would. And it actually, come to think of it, it was also the one sort of artistic expression I ever saw from my dad. Was he would make picture pancakes and entertain us with Mickey Mouse and all kinds of stuff. And it was it was a side of my dad that was quite rarely seen, and that immediately when I smell pancakes now, I will go back to that, and that will be the smell of home.
I can smell that in my mind right now. I love it. I always, whenever I think of home, I think of my mum's perfume that she used to wear at the time, an A&A. And whenever I smell that smell, I'm instantly a child again. And I always think in terms of color, I'm quite a synesthetic person. And I always think of that time as being sort of like a sky blue time, which it really, really was. Like, I had the best parents ever. They were very arty, cool people. I always think of mum's perfume, sky blue, and just laughing a ton. I was very lucky as a child. I want to just keep you there just one moment longer, because I'm always fascinated with people in that childlike state. What if you were to describe the house you lived in, what would it look like in your mind now, and where do you see yourself in it?
My childhood room was an attempt to have a childhood room that was unlike any other childhood room. At one point, I had a tie-dyed tent roof that I sort of tacked up on the ceiling. I had the bottom half of a mannequin sticking out of the ceiling. I had a chest, a toy chest that I just took. I had 100 color magic marker pack and began to just do an intricate pattern on it one day, and that kept me busy for almost a year of just drawing this pattern on this toy chest. To which my dad's response was, "Someone has too much time on their hand." And probably led to all kinds of sort of artistic qualms about the idea that art is a waste of time or whatever. Yeah, that's the space I was in. Was definitely an attempt to create something that was offbeat and different.
I think that sums you up to a T. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to take you out of your childhood for a minute. Woof, there we go.
Oh,
and I'm going to stuff you. I'm going to put you on a mountain in a log cabin, and I want you to tell me all about that. Please, please describe to my listeners exactly what that was like.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a dream of so many people, and it certainly was. It was something that I was simply imagining in my head when I was in a conversation with a good friend who went to university with me, and we were chatting about what we're going to do when we graduate and that sort of thing. And she told her story, and I said, what I'd really love to do is to just go into a cabin in the woods and do that Thoreau thing, and write the great American novel and live close to the earth. And she said, "Oh, my dad's got this cabin in the woods in New Hampshire that gets broken into every winter, and maybe he'd be willing to let you stay there in exchange for watching it." And I was like, "Yeah." And the next thing I know, I'm selling off all of my possessions, and except what will fit into a backpack, and hitchhiking up to Boston. And the backpack was mostly books, I will say, and heading into this cabin in the woods in New Hampshire, which it turned out was a summer cabin, no running water, no electricity, no insulation, tiny, tiny, tiny wood stove that was designed to sort of warm your feet on a chill summer's evening, which meant I basically had to be stoking that wood stove at 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, if I didn't want ice on my toes when I woke up in the morning. So I was spending a lot more time fetching water and chopping wood than I was writing the great American novel. And that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. But it was magical. It was absolutely magical. I would wake up to the dawn chorus, and I would be on my own in terms of finding my way through the day. And I was, up on top of you'd have to call it a hill in New Hampshire. It wasn't really a mountain, but it was a long way away from the nearest sort of neighbor and the nearest general store, a couple hours walk. And at one point I got snowed in and ran out of books, which was absolutely horrifying. More horrifying than the idea of running out of food. And so I started to cannibalize everything that was on this tiny little bookshelf that the doctor in Boston who owned it had left behind. And one of the books on this shelf was this thing called The Warriors of the Rainbow, which was a history of the founding of an organization I had never heard of before called GreenPeace. And I devoured it. I was absolutely in love with it. And by that point, I had had some experience with activism. I had I like to say I became an accidental activist. I went to a concert. I went to what I thought was a concert because I liked Jackson Browne and I liked Bonnie Raitt and I liked Don't Judge the Eagles. And it turned out, oh my gosh, it was a rally. It wasn't a concert. It had a cause. It was the No Nukes tour, which was dedicated to fighting nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And I ended up falling in with the maybe half a dozen radical activists at Georgetown University. And from there, I was going to protests, studied at the feet of a Jesuit priest who had actually broken into missile production plants and was living the biblical instruction, you shall beat your swords into plowshares, and was taking a hammer to nuclear warheads so that they, setting back the arms race as far as he could. Incredibly inspirational and powerful character who, lived this belief and went to jail for it. Yeah, so that had been part of my background, but what I had been doing was walking around with a placard and going to protests, and it felt very ineffective. And when I read this book about GreenPeace, I thought, this is different. This is people, putting their lives on the line, going out and doing what that Jesuit priest had been doing, and actually risking something for what they believed. And that was profoundly moving to me. And I just, I closed that book with just tremendous respect for that organization, which I thought didn't exist anymore. I thought it was gone. And, sort of tucked that away in my book hoard and my experience hoard and thought, that was a really good read, and didn't think anything more would ever come of it.
So what I'm hearing basically is he went into a cabin in the woods, had a major epiphany, and then came out the other side and spent 35 years at GreenPeace.
Yeah. GreenPeace was founded by a bunch of war resistors in Vancouver, some of them who had fled the U.S. draft during the Vietnam War, and some of whom were shaped by Quaker thinking. And the Quaker concept that book introduced me to was this idea of bearing witness, and this idea that, when you bear witness to an injustice or a crime or something that you disagree with, you suddenly have a moral obligation that sort of entangles you with that practice or that thing going ahead, and you may not be able to act on it. This is the beautifully generous and I think healthy thing that Quakerism teaches, is that we can't all act on every injustice that we see. We can't all act on every crime that we witness. But the idea is that the more people witness that crime, the more people are engaged with it and brought to realize it, the more likely that enough people will stand up, or the more likely that the moral disapproval that is being focused on that act will stop it. And I think that's tremendously healthy and wonderful. And I think, that's what I experienced in reading that book. Was there were two questions that GreenPeace was posing. It was like, here's this incredibly complicated situation. We're going to draw a cartoon for you, and we're going to say, here's a whale, and here's a bunch of people in a boat with a harpoon that want to kill the whale, and here's a little boat with hippies in it who are going to sail in front of that harpoon and say, I dare you on my life not to take that whale's life. Which side are you on? And I was on the side of the hippies in the boat, no question. But the trick there was that also introduced a second question, or a moral obligation, which is, what are you going to do about it? And that was the question that sort of slept in my heart when I left the cabin. And it slept through the time that the snow melted, and I didn't starve, but I ran out of money. So I hitchhiked down to Boston. I got a job in a bookstore, and that was fantastic because I was never going to run out of books, and there was electricity and running water, and I didn't have to chop wood. And I was very, very comfortable until, an old friend from high school wandered into this bookstore and said she was working for this organization I'd probably never heard of called GreenPeace. And I said, what? Really? I love what you do. I completely agree with you. I think you're fantastic. I really support all of your efforts. And she leans on the bookstore counter and says, yeah, what are you doing about it? And that was it. She had me. She convinced me to come down to the GreenPeace office, which was in a rundown warehouse on the edge of the Boston Wharf, and to knock on doors and to go out canvassing. And I was petrified. It was absolutely something that was not in my comfort zone, not in my wheelhouse, but that was what she had to offer for what I could do about these issues that I cared about. And that was the start of a 35-year journey.
It's so inspiring. And I hope that if anyone out there is listening to this and thinking about activism or posing that question to themselves, what are you going to do about it? That they will have that bravery or that guts to get involved. And it is eye-opening, isn't it? I mean, what we see in the media is a smattering, a marshmallow account of the deep, deep roots of the problems that are being tackled by people like yourself. So I think that was the thing for me. Animals Asia was really 2007. My friend gave me a cuddly moon bear, and it had a tag on the side, and she went, I don't know why, but I feel like I need to give this to you for your birthday. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I looked at what was happening on this label of this bear and started to Google it, and that was it for me. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening in the world. Oh my goodness. But yeah, at the time I was part of a roller derby team, Plymouth City Roller Girls, holla. And Lara Simpson, who I knew as Lara, the girl that sort of like buffed me out of the ring every 5 minutes. She worked for Animals Asia. Anyway, on the back of getting this cuddly bear, I emailed Animals Asia and I just said, look, I don't know how I can help you. I don't know what to do, but I'm so touched by your story. I need to help you. Basically, I want to dedicate time to helping your cause, and I love it. And Lara responded and went, Kat, it's me, it's Lara. I was like, what? The girl that boosts me out the ring every 5 minutes? So, and then that lovely sort of synchro destiny, a bit like you and your friend that you met who worked for GreenPeace, it just started a journey for myself. And I've never looked back. And even though it's torturous to look at things like that, it's so necessary. And I think the one thing that I learned very, very quickly is I spent about 2 years after that just crying because I felt guilty that I couldn't help the whole world. And once I discovered that, I discovered other things, and GreenPeace being one of the prevalent influences at that time for me as well. And I felt overwhelmed with helplessness, I think is the word. And then one of my friends said, you know what? Just concentrate on your bubble of the world and one thing. And if you can dedicate time to that one thing, then chances are you'll be able to change it a little bit whilst you're here on this earth. Yeah. And that calmed my mind, because we all have to choose one battle, right? And go for it 100% and hope that we can bring something to the table that will eventually help or open someone else's eyes. And hopefully that's,
and I feel like,
it's not too painful for them.
Between our two stories, I mean, I think both of us got an invitation, and it was an invitation in, a weirdly unconventional, a cuddly toy and a concert. How are those two things, sort of the standard paths to activism, and it's key to story as well. There's always the call to the hero to set out on a journey or to step out of their comfort zone or anything like that. And, for so many artists like yourself, I think there's so many people out there who would just love to, apply their talents and their creativity and their gifts to making the world a better place. But it's very hard to find those invitations in the activist world. I think, I spent a lot of time, and I'm guilty of this myself, so I'm not pointing fingers, but, I think George Monbiot said something about, I don't know a single environmentalist who became an environmentalist because of a report. They always tell stories about, this incredible relationship they had with a lake or a forest or some part of nature that called out to their heart and that they absolutely adored and they wanted to protect. And yet those aren't the ways that activists today try to recruit people. They try to scare them into action, inform them into action. So much of this, sort of focus on the head and rational sort of thought, when, the path for so many of them and for so many of us is through the heart. It's through music or a cuddly toy or, something we love that spurs us to action. And yeah, I think that's an essential missing trick that we've got to get right.
I utterly agree. And I think, talking from that angle, I mean, that's pretty much the ethos of Dancing Fox. Everything that you've just said about inviting people, giving them something more innocent to play with, maybe an idea or a cartoon or an artistic creation. It does sort of invoke that push, that inspiration, that command to action, and I really admire it. I really, really do. So I'm going to take you into Dancing Fox a little bit now, because I'm just so, I'm one of your biggest groupies. I hold my hands up. I'm not afraid to say, I'm a Dancing Fox groupie. So I'm going to ask you.
Right back at you, girl.
I'm going to ask you the same question that you asked me when I went into that room. Tell me something unusual about yourself.
Yeah. This is a very conscious exercise that we do, because generally in sort of meeting introductions, people are going to tell you the stories that make them, seem big and important and thinky and all those things that we want people to think about us. But we love the idea that the only people that aren't weird are people we don't know very well. And, when you confess something weird, you open up and you sort of share and you become vulnerable and human in a way that, it just sets a better sort of creative tone for a gathering of beautiful minds, which is always what we try to do in our play shops. The one weird thing I do is picked up from my sister-in-law, which is if somebody on an escalator or a staircase or a hall in front of me has their tag sticking up in the back of their neck, it's just something that I realize they're going to be blind to all day, and they need help. So I reach out and gently just let them know, don't panic. This is just something I do. And I tuck it in for them. And that's my sort of random act of kindness, my sort of, and I'm not a fashion hound. It's not something that I'm obsessive about. It's just something that I feel like, we all have our blind spots, and that's one of them. So that's a weird thing I do. How about you, Cat Savage? What's a weird thing that you do?
Well, one of the weird things that I do, well, I mentioned in the last play shop actually, is I run ideas past my rabbit Jasper. So I talk obsessively to him about the books that I read on the bookshelf, which he's a house rabbit, so he flutters around the house being awesome. And but when I'm reading on the bookshelf, it's on the stairs, and he likes to come up and sit on my lap whilst I read. So I'll discuss, the deep, complex nature of a book, or I'll tell him about my day, or I'll be whispering in his ear, and he's a great listener. He's probably the best listener ever. But then I realized that not everyone does this. They don't talk to their pets as people do. So I'm like, what? You don't discuss like, your day with your pet? No, I just, stroke him and stuff. Oh, okay. That's weird then, right? Yeah. So I tend not to share that information often, but now it's out there. You drew it out of me, Brian. What can I say?
Hey, stay. We at Dancing Fox are big.
I'll be Dr. Doolittle from now on.
Big fans of rabbits and following rabbits down rabbit holes. There's adventures to be had there. So,
talking of animals, what is the Dancing Fox? Can you even answer that question on air?
Yeah. Tommy and I are very, very different people. We think very differently. This is why we have a great creative process. And but I have to say, the name of the organization took us ages. But I think we landed on something that we both love, and that has Yeah, it has quite a few stories attached to it, actually. But one of them is that, the fox is an animal that is at home in two worlds. It's very, very, very comfortable in an urban environment. It's very, very comfortable in a wild place. And we like to think of Dancing Fox as sort of that trickster character who stands at a threshold between the possible and the seemingly impossible, and the creative and the sort of the day-to-day sort of urban sort of space with straight lines and right angles that's very predictable that most activists work in. And we like to think of the fox as sort of a character that can transit those two worlds and shepherd people out of that village and into the forest of creativity to find, a slightly uncertain, out of your comfort zone space, but a place where there's real treasure to be had, and be able to bring them back through the threshold into their village space and be able to turn that into great, culture transforming ideas and campaigns that really sing and speak to the heart rather than the mind, and can inspire and gather people around them in ways that is activism at its best. And activism at its best, I think, is deeply, deeply rooted in story and knowing how story can move people's hearts and their actions and their behavior.
It's so beautiful hearing you talk the way you do, and so impassioned about what you can bring out in people. But the one thing I love about you guys is you always start your workshops with, let's make some mischief. We're mischief makers. What is this mischief you're referring to, and how do you bring it out?
Well, this is where, with my activist hat on, all activism is disruption of the status quo, and that is mischief in some sense. But it's mischief with a kind and a playful sort of edge to it. It's and this is where as we love bringing artists into the creative process with activists. It just changes the dynamic entirely, and for many reasons. And I think activists and artists are of the same tribe. They both have that sort of impatience with the status quo, with what already exists. They're looking to create the new. They're looking to shake things up a little bit. And the beauty of bringing these two tribes into each other's presence is that they infect each other. And, I spent so many years in creative brainstorms. It was just what we did at GreenPeace constantly. But so often we did it so poorly. We would sit at the same table with the same people, tackling the same problem, and keep coming up with the same ideas. And GreenPeace is much better at it than most, I will say. But as soon as you bring artists into that room, the dynamic changes. Your experts can't speak in their jargon anymore. They have to speak in a language that's understandable to a human being. You have to explain the issue to someone who doesn't think about it 24/7, who's not steeped in it, and isn't thinking in terms of the normal sort of constructs and the constraints and the limitations and the possibilities, but sees things differently. And this is, artists are great at this. They can take a really complex situation or idea and either simplify it or look at it from a completely unexpected angle. And so, the magic of these workshops is we end up with a bunch of artists that are suddenly infected with this idea about how they can change the world, and this bunch of activists who are suddenly infected with this different way of thinking about their issue. And every artist walks out a little bit more activist, and every activist walks out a little bit more artist. And I think, the world is a little bit better for that sort of mashup.
I utterly agree. In fact, the last time that I worked with you, I hadn't even heard of the charity 50/40 when I came in on board with you guys. And by the end of it, I was so enthused. I was Googling them, and, I follow their Insta, and I'm, thanks to the workshop, now interacting with another charity that I didn't know anything about. And it's such a beautiful, I don't want to use the word infection, but it's such a beautiful viral feeling that you guys create between the two worlds. And it's so buzzy, and you end up talking to people for days, and it ripple effects out. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to bring into the world. I'm so, it makes me giddy just thinking about what you guys do. But I'm going to take you into, what can you remember your first ever, and I'm going to call it play shop in Dancing Fox terms. Can you remember the first ever play shop? Because I know that you're quite an introvert person at heart, extrovert, introvert, I would say, listening to how you've spoken today so eloquently. But can you remember how you were feeling, and how did that experience go?
Oh, I safely say I was terrified, because I'm always terrified when I get on stage. It's hard to pin it down, because it was such an organic process of, I spent a lot of time at GreenPeace facilitating meetings and getting up and leading a group of people through a particular conclusion, that sort of thing. But when Tommy Crawford arrived on the scene at GreenPeace, he had this idea of, okay, everything that we've been doing about creativity and meeting and, getting good ideas out of a group of people could be better. And how do we break this up? That sort of restless sort of filter of, okay, how do we make the introductions different? How do we make the room different? How do we get out into a wild space instead of a corporate tulip hotel sort of space? And that was super exciting. So I think probably the first workshop that we did of that nature was actually still within GreenPeace. And it was exciting, because it was way outside of my comfort zone, in the same way that, knocking on a door was outside of my comfort zone. But the wonderful thing about stepping outside of your comfort zone is that your comfort zone, that gets bigger, and it's easier to do the next time. And I think it just, that's certainly my experience of getting up in front of a bunch of people, is that it does get easier with time. And I think one of the things that, over my lifetime that I've learned is that whether you like it or not, if you sort of leave yourself open to it, life will pull you towards what you're good at, whether you want to do that or not. And I feel like that kind of was my experience, that it turned out to be something I had skills at, but didn't really want to do, because I'm not the kind of character who plans my life out and says, I'm going to go from A to B, and this is how I'm going to do it. I ended up getting drawn into something that, I really quite enjoy. And part of it may be because it takes a certain amount of courage, and it takes a certain amount of risk to go out there and do that. And, risk is thrilling. It's something that keeps you alive. It's something that keeps you curious and interested, and always doubting yourself, and continuously sort of falling flat on your face and learning, and surprising yourself with how well you can do. So for other introverts that are out there, that have these incredibly risky, courageous ideas, but don't quite know how to action them, I mean, do you have any rituals that help you to bring courage to the table and do it? Or was it more the fact that you were working with a couple of other people that brought that courage to step forth with your ideas forward? Yeah, we've done a lot of work on courage. When we were crafting the GreenPeace story, we really struggled with what is the gift that GreenPeace gives. And, across all of its campaign and all of its history. And when we stripped it right down to its basis, it was courage. And the trouble we were having with this is that courage is not something I can give. I can't say, here, Cat Savage, borrow a cup of courage. I'll just hand it to you. It's not that kind of a gift. You have to create the conditions for it. And one of the conditions for it is not feeling alone. And this goes straight to the heart of why the kind of storytelling that you do around, your little bear, or the storytelling that I do about, a concert turning me into activist is so important, because, it makes people realize that they are not alone in, feeling that they need to speak up, or they need to stand up, or that there are opportunities for them to stand up. On that, that sort of invitation and that call, when you hear it, is something that you can act on. And I think, camaraderie and a sense of, I'm a part of something bigger. There is a tribe out there that has my back. There is a tribe out there that I can learn from. There are people out there who will, come to my aid if I'm in trouble, and buck me up when I'm down, and, keep me going. That's absolutely essential. I walked onto a nuclear weapons test site in 1982 with 4 comrades. I would never do that alone, not in a million years. But I had training. I had friends who I knew were going to be there for me, and we made each other courageous. And I think that's an essential part of the equation. Find that person who's going to draw you out and help you, and find the tribe that they're attached to.
I'm sorry, I just can't get over the fact that you stepped onto a nuclear bomb test site. We need to just quickly talk about that, because you can't just throw that in, Brian, and then brush over it and then not really talk about it. So tell us about that experience. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, this was, I grew up in the Cold War, and I had nothing to compare it to. So I thought it was just normal that everybody knew where the fallout shelter was, and that everybody was doing duck and cover, and as children learning to get under the desk because the missiles could come down at any moment. It's really, really hard to describe how omnipresent that threat felt. And so, yeah, I mean, as a consequence of what I told you about earlier, of going to that concert, of reading that book from GreenPeace, of going out and canvassing, I ended up, running some actions at the GreenPeace Boston office that were successful, and ended up being asked to be one of 4 people who were going to walk onto the Nevada nuclear weapons test site at a time that a detonation was scheduled, and, do what some of those heroes of the early GreenPeace story were doing, and that had inspired me so much, and say, I dare you on my life not to detonate that nuclear weapon. It was something where we were the first group to ever try to get to ground zero. We were working with all kinds of unknowns. We had to walk across the Nellis Air Force Base, which was a live bombing range. We knew that the security around the Nevada test site, height of the Cold War again, were authorized to use deadly force, and that we could be shot, and that we were expecting to encounter fences and watchtowers and all kinds of stuff. And, we just realized after 2 days of walking towards ground zero that the test site was basically relying on the wilderness around it for security. We saw not a security guard. We didn't see any gun mounts, nothing. And we ended up being able to walk right up to a ridge overlooking the site where they were about to test this nuclear weapon. And in those days, there was no mobile phones. We had to send a member of the team back out with a roll of film to prove that we were there, and to say that they couldn't detonate the test because they would be endangering our lives. And for 4 days, we slowed down the arms race, and I'll always be extremely proud of that. But I also will say that the courage that it took with my extremely brave comrades who we trained with for a month, we knew, exactly what we were getting into. The courage to do that was nothing compared to the courage it took for me to knock on my first door as a GreenPeace canvasser. That was the moment of stepping out of my comfort zone that was the hardest. And, when you're up against your own sort of fear, that can be the biggest obstacle. When it came to the Nevada test site, I was up against the nuclear arms race. I was up against the US and the UK military, and I was passionate about opposing those things. And those motivated me and drove me forward and gave me courage. Facing my own fear, that's a bigger monster to face.
I'm utterly speechless listening to you tell that story and knowing you as a person, imagining you, visualizing you in that scenario. I mean, my heart is literally beating so fast to think that you were willing to put your life on the line and the courage it took to take that. But then hearing you talking about knocking on that door, I can totally relate to that. I can't relate at all to the nuclear bomb site, but I can in some weird way. But the door thing, I totally get that. Having the courage to go one-to-one with your beliefs and what you stand for and try to get someone who may not have the same beliefs to come to a common ground with you, that really is something very, very brave to do. Would you say that, out of those two moments, would you say either one were your bravest moment?
Oh, it was canvassing without doubt. It was absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I never felt that scared in the Nevada desert. I never felt that scared in the run-up to the Nevada desert. It was that felt like something that I had to do, and I had friends around me that were doing it as well. And, I had friends around me that were canvassing as well, but you're all alone at the door. And that was, that was tough. It was tough. And, and I think this is part of the reason that, one of the things that is so hard to do today, when we've got, the polarization of social media and all of that stuff, is to actually have a face-to-face conversation with someone about a disagreement. It's a skill that's atrophying in society, and that's so dangerous. I think that's it's absolutely essential that we confront our disagreements. And I think that it's me. I go deep into anthropology on this and the history of the human race and the historical sort of dialogue between liberal forces and conservative forces that have led us to survive all these years, and that conversation can't break down. It especially in a time when we're threatened by climate change and all of the existential threats that we're facing in the world. It's absolutely essential that we be reaching out to each other and talking to each other and treating each other like human beings.
I think it takes a lot of courage to talk to someone face to face, as you're rightly saying. And it's something that I'm seeing coming up the generations, that it's easy to text someone as opposed to call someone. It's easy to, and I'm, subject to this generation. I'm quite happy to message someone over Facebook, but I probably won't, interact with them too much in my day, and unless they're a really, really close friend. Not that I'm afraid to, but it's part of our generation down. The scariest thing, I think, is actually sharing your opinion face to face. So, what advice would you give to the younger generations to really up that skill and not let it die out with technology?
Well, it needs to be practiced, and it is a muscle, and unless you exercise it, it doesn't happen. And I think it's easy to start with the small stuff, the less consequential stuff. The really, really hard stuff is where there's identity involved, and I think it's very, very, very hard to talk somebody out of a position that defines their identity. And so I think it's really important to just make people feel safe in, I'm not trying to change who you are. I don't want to convert you. I want to understand. I want to, let's explore why two intelligent people who have, deeply felt values can come to such a different conclusion about this. And I think if you treat it as an investigation, you treat it as an exploration, and you provide it with a frame in which neither side is evil or neither side has ill intent, then it's much easier and it's much more productive. And it's having the grace to enter the conversation knowing that you want to have the space to agree to disagree if that's what it comes to. But if you can find common ground, that's magic. That's absolute magic. And, I'm absolutely convinced that there is common ground in the survival of our species and the future of the planet. And it's just a question of getting to that place without tripping over the landmines of triggering those deeply held identity values that make people feel, oh, if I say this or I believe this, I'm going to betray my tribe, because that sense of tribal belonging is, it's deep in our evolutionary history. And so one of the things that helped us survive is, being loyal to your tribe was something that made you able to survive a cold winter or a struggle over resources. And it's very, very hard to break that. So I think the key for at least a few more 100 years is going to be to work with it rather than against it.
Oh, I could listen to you talk all day. I love it. I absolutely love it. I learn so much from you, and you inspire so much in me. It's such a lovely interaction. I just love it. I love that it's actually on record now for all to hear. So I'm gonna flip this interview a little bit on its head and ask you some wackier questions, if that's all right with you.
Wacky questions. Get out of town.
Let's go for it. So, if you were in a zombie apocalypse, what would you use as a weapon and where would you hide?
Well, that's not a wacky question. I think about that every day, Cat Savage. What would I use as a weapon and where would I hide? Good heavens. I would go to the sea, because I just learned something from your podcast with your foraging teacher, who said that, if you're ever in a zombie apocalypse, head towards the sea, because the kelp, the seaweed, everything there has all the nutrition that you absolutely need. So I learned something from your podcast about where I would hide. Weapon, that's tougher. Zombies. What weapon would I use against zombies? My weapon would be a very, very, very big brick wall.
Good luck with that, with all the sand around you.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, the library's burning. What 3 books do you save?
I can't possibly choose. It's like asking me to choose which child I'm going to save from a fire, Cat Savage. It's an unfair question. I refuse to answer it.
Well, it's a shame, because I wanted you to rescue at least one.
I would be hopeless in that situation. I'd be standing there going, oh, look at that, and then this one, and that one, and then that one. Maybe I should rescue one that I haven't read. Or do I rescue one that's going to be the most useful to society moving forward? Because maybe this is the last library that's burning. And no, I'd be paralyzed. I'd be paralyzed by the magnitude of that choice. Useless.
It can't be done. You're right. Okay.
Exactly.
So if you were to die today, rest in peace, but be reincarnated tomorrow, what 3 memories, skills, or objects would you bring to the next life?
I think both a memory and a skill, and I guess something that I've learned over the years, would be, I don't know what your new name is, but whoever you are, get over the idea that anything you buy is going to say anything about who you are. It's what you make and what you do and what you create that define who you are. And yeah, I wasted so much time in my youth thinking that, I was expressing my identity by what I was consuming. That's just plain stupid. And I would definitely not want to spend the time that I spent learning that lesson in another life. I'd like to just hit the ground running with that realization. That would be fantastic. I would take the memory of my marriage, my relationship, and the idea of, nurturing and holding on to a lifelong relationship and what that feels like and how important that's going to be in your life. Yeah, that's something, again, that I would love to build on rather than start from scratch on. And in terms of memory, I would love to carry learning Italian. I would like to not have to learn Italian again, to be able to speak it, because I think it's a beautiful language and I don't want to start from scratch. I want to keep building on that. So that would be one I'd take forward.
I love that. Oh. Okay. If you could meet your 100-year-old self today, what do you think he would say to you?
Well done, buddy. Making it to 100? Yeah, good on you. There were some times you may not remember when that didn't seem likely at all. I was definitely in the camp of die young, stay pretty when I was in my youth. Yeah, it would be a pat on the back. That would be it.
He's very demure and humble. I like it. So if you were to write a book about your incredible life, which I hope one day you will, because from what I've heard today, it's an unbelievable life, what would the title be and why?
Adventures in Curiosity.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think curiosity has kind of been the lodestone, the sort of my magnetic north. I followed it in all kinds of directions that never would make sense in hindsight, that don't really piece together in hindsight. And yet, it's never done me wrong. In some ways, it's always been a good pointer towards adventure and learning and, wonderful experiences.
I love it. I want an adventure in curiosity. I'm coming with you. So finally, what advice would you like to give to the world right now?
Probably the same advice that Kurt Vonnegut gave to newborn babies. Be kind. Be kind. That's it. And I think if we all, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about that core lesson of so many of the world's religions, that's the magic key, if we were kinder to the planet, if we were kinder to our fellow travelers on this planet, if we were kinder to each other, so many of the world's ills would be so much better. And, it's the kind of thing that we can practice at a fractal sort of tiny, tiny way. And we all know it makes you feel better. A random act of kindness, whether you're on the receiving end or the giving end, it reconfirms your sense of, this sort of experiment called human beings is actually, it's okay. Yeah, it kind of works. And we need more of that in the world.
Thank you so much, Brian, for your wonderful, heart-filled, beautiful words and wisdom, as always. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. If people want to find out more about Dancing Fox, where can they find you?
Well, they can find us at the unfortunately hyphenated dancing-fox.com. Do not be fooled by the winery called Dancing Fox. We are not a California winery. We are a storytelling agency. And you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram. And all those places.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been such a joy.
Oh, likewise. And thank you for everything you do, Kat. You're a magical being, and we just love working with you. And my fellow Fox, Lucy, and I were just having an appreciative session about your role in the Last Play Shop and your podcast and everything you do. So thank you. Thank you so much for being who you are and doing what you do, and more power to you, girl.
Have a lovely day, whatever you're up to.
You too. And happy Thursday, Day of Thunder.
Why, thank you.
Bye.
From the moment that I met Brian, I knew I had found a kindred spirit in this life. With a mischievous smile on his face, Brian opens up the world through the great art of storytelling, and as a consequence ignites people's hearts and artistic flair. That is his chosen role in life, and what a beautiful way to live it. He's also a man that would quite happily spend his life in the solace of books in a peaceful cabin in the woods. I can absolutely relate to that juxtaposition of what I like to call the extrovert-introvert. On one side, there is a galvanizing, passionate force, and on the other, one that craves that grounding, solitary space that only nature can provide. I love that Brian allows himself the opportunity to expand his comfort zone with every step he courageously takes out of it, and doesn't let fear or nerves get the better of him. Instead, he allows these feelings to fuel him and grows a little more into who he is. Brian, in every sense, is willing to stand up for what he believes in and dares people, literally on his life, to challenge their own path along the moral compass towards a better way to live in the world. Whether approaching people one-on-one or stepping foot onto a nuclear bomb testing site, Brian's heart governs his every action. He is led by a force bigger than himself, which even when he feels afraid to approach a situation, leans him into it, allowing him to explore, expand, and bear witness, as opposed to being inhibited by the barriers we believe are there but are not. It is hard to feel small in Brian's company. He literally makes his living out of building people up. When I have had the privilege to work with the Dancing Fox team, I've always come away feeling fired up, validated, empowered, and elevated with the feeling that even I, just one person, could make a difference in this world. When someone introduces you to your own imagination, you realise that it is as limitless and capable as anyone else's, and therefore as capable to change the world for the better. Brian and the Dancing Fox team literally give people lightsabers and teach them how to use them. But even if you don't happen to have a dancing fox in your life, I'm going to tell you now that you are more creative than you think. You have a heart that beats out a unique rhythm that defines who you are, and if you believe in it, if you give yourself the permission, you can change the dance of life. You can have other people join in and learn your steps, and importantly add to the choreography of the world that we are all trying to contribute to. It is up to us to change the dance, to elevate it and expand it with fresh new steps, and you, my dear listeners, absolutely have that ability. Find that something bigger to care about. Maybe it's within your community. Maybe it's on the other side of the world, but search for it and listen to the calling. And no matter where it leads you, if you've listened with that incredible heart of yours, you cannot go wrong. I dare you to change the dance. I dare you to embrace your part to play in the story, and I dare you to take on the imaginary wall of your comfort zone and cartwheel your way through it. We all have this one chance to make our world a better place for those that come after us. And the more we connect, the more we explore, the more we action what we bear witness to, the more beauty we put back into the world. As Charles Bukowski once said, "We are here to laugh at the odds and live our lives so well that death will tremble to take us." Next week, we speak to multi-instrumentalist Colin Seddon about life, music, and touring the world in the pursuit of happiness. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the show. If you have a spare moment now, please like, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in a review on Apple Podcasts, which will really help other people like yourself to find the show. Of course, you can also share the show with your friends by following us at the Brave Moment Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, or on Twitter at Moment Brave, or just follow the Linktree on all of our social media platforms. It's been so wonderful to have you all here with me again. Please get in touch with your own stories, and remember, your brave moment starts now.